My name is Ethan Cole, and if you had asked me 10 years ago what I thought of the word family, I would have given you a very different answer than I would now. Back then, I thought family meant unconditional love, support, and safety. But I learned, painfully, that sometimes the people who should believe in you the most are the ones who give up on you first. I grew up in a middle-class neighborhood in Columbus, Ohio, where every lawn looked the same and every family seemed to be running the same race. School, job, marriage, mortgage, retirement. My parents, Mark and Susan Cole, were good people, at least that's what everyone outside our house believed. My dad worked as a finance manager at a car dealership and my mom was a part-time nurse. They paid bills on time, attended PTA meetings, and smiled in Christmas photos. But behind closed doors, things were colder. I was always the creative one in the family, the kid who sketched on napkins and dreamed of building something bigger than myself. But to my parents, creativity was just code for lazy. They were practical, traditional, and deeply invested in the belief that success only came through secure jobs and steady paychecks. They wanted me to become an accountant or an engineer, something safe. But I wanted to be an entrepreneur. I didn't have a plan yet, just a relentless drive to build, invent, and prove I could make something of myself without following the same script. I still remember the moment everything shifted. I had just turned 19. I was sitting at the kitchen table, nervously explaining my idea for an online custom apparel business. I had designed a few mock-ups, done some rough research on suppliers, and even made a basic website. I asked my dad if he could loan me $2,000 to help get the first batch of inventory started. He didn't even look up from his coffee. "Ethan," he said flatly, "if you want to play pretend, use your own money. We're not wasting real dollars on fantasy." My mom chimed in from across the room. "Honey, maybe it's time to get serious. College applications aren't going to fill themselves out." That moment stung more than I expected. I wasn't even asking for a handout. I was offering a chance to invest. But to them, it was ridiculous. Childish. Not worth a conversation. "Okay," I muttered, swallowing the lump in my throat. "I get it." I went upstairs and stared at the ceiling for hours that night. Their rejection wasn't just about money. It was about trust. They didn't believe in me, not even enough to pretend. That was the first crack. A few days later, something strange happened. I overheard my parents talking late at night. Their bedroom door was cracked open slightly. I was walking past to grab water from the kitchen when I heard my name. "I just don't get why he won't take the damn hint," my dad said, his voice low but sharp. "We've been clear. No more money. No more bailing him out." "We did what we could," my mom replied. "He's 19. He needs to learn the hard way." Bailing me out? What were they talking about? I'd never asked them for anything outside that one request. And I certainly wasn't the one draining their resources. If anything, I'd been taking on side gigs and odd jobs to avoid asking them for help. What were they planning? I stood frozen in the hallway, heart pounding. The air felt heavier, like the house itself had turned hostile. It was one thing to say no to my dreams, but hearing them talk about me like I was a burden, that was a different kind of pain. I crept back to my room and stared at the glowing screen of my laptop. I opened a new spreadsheet and started making a list, everything I needed to launch my brand without them. I had about $380 to my name from tutoring and some freelance graphic design work. It wasn't much, but it was a start. Over the next few weeks, I noticed my parents acting colder. Dinners became shorter, conversations more transactional. When I mentioned anything remotely related to business or creativity, they rolled their eyes or changed the subject. One night, I brought up a podcast I'd been listening to about bootstrapping your first company. My dad cut me off. "Jesus, Ethan, enough with this entrepreneur crap. You think you're the next Zuckerberg just because you bought a domain name?" He laughed. My mom didn't even look up from her phone. That's when something in me shifted. It was like a curtain dropped. I realized I wasn't going to get their support, financially, emotionally, or otherwise. And maybe that was exactly what I needed. The next day, I sold my old gaming console, a stack of DVDs, and even my childhood bike. I raised just over $600 in total. Then I found a local screen printing company that agreed to do a small run of 20 shirts with no minimum order. I spent the next 2 weeks building my first Shopify store, designing social media graphics, and teaching myself how to run Facebook ads using free YouTube tutorials. I launched on a Wednesday afternoon. I didn't expect much, maybe 1 or 2 sales from friends. But by midnight, I had 12 orders. 12. And none of them were people I knew. I cried alone in my room that night, not because I was rich or successful, but because someone somewhere believed enough in my idea to click buy. A month later, I walked into the kitchen with a stack of orders in my backpack. I was planning to drop them off at the post office before heading to my part-time shift at the print shop. My dad noticed the packages. "What's all that junk?" "Orders," I said calmly. He raised an eyebrow. "From who?" "You begging people online now." I smiled without answering. Let him think what he wants. That was the last time I mentioned my business to them for a long time. Weeks passed, then months. My brand started to pick up traction. One of my designs got featured by a popular Instagram account with over 100,000 followers. That single post brought in $2,000 in one day, more than I'd made in all of high school. I reinvested every penny. No parties, no splurges, just growth. But my parents, they didn't ask. They didn't care. They still believed I was wasting time. What they didn't know was that I'd quietly moved my operation out of my bedroom and into a shared co-working space downtown. I'd partnered with a supplier in California who could scale with me. By the time I turned 21, I was making more money per month than my dad's entire annual salary. Still, I never said a word. Not until the day everything finally flipped, but I'll get to that. For now, all you need to know is this. It started with a no money, no support, no belief in me. But I turned their no into my reason. And once I realized I didn't need their permission, that's when I became unstoppable. It started with a Facebook friend request. After years of cold silence, after they told me to pack my bags and figure it out on my own, my mother had suddenly sent a friend request. No message, just her full name, her default profile picture, still the family portrait taken long before they shut me out of their lives. At first, I thought it was a mistake. Maybe she hit the button by accident. Maybe it was curiosity. She wanted to see how badly I'd failed without their help. But then came the follow-up. My father liked a LinkedIn post I made, one where I'd casually mentioned securing a new round of funding for my company. A few days later, he commented, "Proud of you, son," under a promotional photo of one of our new product launches. Proud? The same man who said, "If you think this fantasy startup thing is more important than school, don't come crawling back when it fails." The same father who slammed the door in my face the night I told them I dropped out of college to chase my idea. Something wasn't adding up. I began to notice patterns. They weren't just popping up online, they were following, watching. Silent observers in a story they thought would end in my defeat. But it hadn't. I didn't respond. I left the friend request pending. I let the comments sit unanswered. But inside, my heart was pounding. Not because I missed them, but because I couldn't make sense of their motives. And then a message came. From my younger cousin, Jenna. "Hey, I had lunch with your parents last week. They were talking about you nonstop. Aunt May was saying you drive some fancy Tesla now. And Uncle Rick said he saw you on a business podcast. Are you, like, secretly famous or something?" I felt the blood drain from my face. That was it. They knew. They finally knew. For years, I had built in silence. Alone. No calls, no financial help, no emotional support. I worked brutal shifts at a diner while coding through the night. I launched prototypes from a secondhand laptop. I ate ramen 5 days a week, burned through internships, pitched to investors who laughed at me, until one didn't. That one yes had changed everything. And now the same people who told me my dreams weren't real, who looked me in the eye and said, "We're not funding failure," were suddenly proud? No. Something else was going on. I started digging. I went through old emails, texts, anything to find a clue if they had reached out before. But it was just blank space. Silence stretching across years. And now, this warmth? It wasn't love. It wasn't remorse. It felt strategic.
Timed.
Like they'd been waiting for the moment I became valuable again. And that's when the real anxiety kicked in. Were they planning something? I remembered what my dad once told me when I was 16, after I crashed his car. You'll always be a burden unless you prove otherwise. That's just life. We don't carry dead weight. His words echoed through my mind like a curse. Back then, I believed him. I internalized it so deeply that I nearly broke myself trying to be less of a burden. But now I wondered, did they believe those words too? Or had they used them as a weapon to control me? Had all their tough love been about teaching me a lesson, or simply cutting ties to what they thought was a failure? The paranoia grew. One evening, I got home from the office and stood outside my apartment building for 5 minutes, just staring at the dark windows above. I didn't want to go inside. I didn't want to be alone with my thoughts. I felt like a child again, trapped in a home that didn't feel safe, surrounded by people who used love like currency and affection like leverage. When I finally went inside, I found another message waiting. This time from my mother. Hi, sweetheart. I know it's been a long time. I've been thinking about you lately. We were so harsh before, and we're sorry. Can we talk? No explanation. No context. Just, we're sorry. As if the years of neglect could be erased with 3 words. Still, I didn't reply. I couldn't shake the feeling that this was a setup. Maybe they thought I'd forgotten everything they said. Maybe they believed that my success would make me soft, forgiving. But success didn't erase trauma. It just dressed it in nicer clothes. I started noticing more strange things. A mutual friend told me they had seen my parents at a community fundraiser, bragging that their son was a tech mogul now. That they always knew he'd make it. I laughed out loud when I heard that. Always knew? The same parents who kicked me out, who told me to find out how the real world works? Who didn't even text me on my birthday for 3 years. They were rewriting the narrative. Pretending they'd supported me all along. Claiming me only now that the headlines and paychecks were rolling in. And yet, part of me still wanted to know why. Why now? What had changed? The final clue came unexpectedly from my sister. She and I hadn't spoken in a while, but we weren't exactly enemies. We just lived in separate orbits, ever since she took their side during our fallout. But her message was blunt. Just so you know, Mom and Dad are in trouble. Dad's job got downsized, and the mortgage is a mess. I think they're hoping you'll step in. There it was. The truth, finally spoken. They didn't reach out because they missed me. They didn't apologize out of guilt. They were drowning and they thought I was the lifeboat. For a moment I felt sick, like my chest had caved in. All this time, I wondered if there had been a shift of heart. If some distant flicker of parental love had finally reawakened. But no. This wasn't love. It was survival. And suddenly, every comment, every message, every unexpected interaction made perfect sense. They needed money. They needed me. And yet they still hadn't asked outright. They were still tiptoeing, pretending this was about family, about rebuilding bridges. That was the most manipulative part of all. They were laying the groundwork, guilt-tripping me in slow motion, hoping I'd offer before they had to beg. But this wasn't the boy who left with a suitcase and a heart full of hurt. This was the man who built his future brick by bloody brick and who finally saw the game for what it was. And now I had a choice to make. I still remember the way their words had settled into my skin like frostbite. No money, no support, figure it out yourself. My parents didn't just cut me off, they cut me out. I had heard it all before. You're not responsible enough. Your dreams are unrealistic. You need a real job, not some fantasy. They said these things with tight-lipped finality, the kind that leaves no room for negotiation. But now, years later, something had shifted. It started with a message request on Facebook from my father. Just a few words. Hey, can we talk? No emojis. No warmth. Just a sudden breach in years of silence. I didn't respond. Not immediately. I watched it sit there, haunting me like a ghost from a past I was still learning to forgive. That message didn't feel like curiosity. It felt like a precursor to something bigger. A week passed and then came a second message, this time from my mother. We heard about your success. Would love to reconnect. Things haven't been easy here. And that was it. No apology. No acknowledgement of the years I spent scraping rent, sleeping in my car, eating dollar ramen while building my company from the ground up. Just a vague emotional bait tossed my way as if I were a stranger with a conscience. I thought maybe I was overreacting. Maybe they had changed. Maybe time softened them. I told myself I was being paranoid, that old wounds were clouding my ability to see the truth. So, for the first time in nearly 5 years, I called. The voice on the other end wasn't the cold, overbearing version of my father that haunted my childhood. No, this voice was tired.
Worn. Defeated.
He tried to laugh, but it sounded brittle. I could hear the desperation even through the fake cheer. You really made it, huh? The whole world's talking about your app. I saw it on Bloomberg. I kept my voice steady. Why now? There was a long pause. Then came the cough, the kind of cough people make when they're about to lie, or worse, tell a half-truth. We miss you. And we're proud. I clenched my jaw. Is that really why you're reaching out? Another pause. Longer this time. Well, he finally admitted. Things have been rough. Business went under. The house is on the line. I thought maybe you'd want to help. And there it was, the truth that dropped into my chest like a lead weight. I said nothing. I didn't know what to say. Part of me wanted to scream. Another part just felt numb. I had imagined this moment 1,000 times. What I'd say, how I'd deliver the ultimate mic drop, how I'd remind them of every humiliation, every sleepless night I endured without a shred of their support. But I didn't feel triumphant. I felt hollow. That night, I walked through my penthouse apartment with the lights off, letting the silence soak into my bones. I looked around at the success they said I'd never have. Floor-to-ceiling windows. Italian marble counters. The scent of expensive leather from my brand-new custom couch. I had everything. And yet, I felt like the same broken kid who once cried into a towel in the back seat of his rundown Honda Civic. They hadn't changed. Life had just humbled them. I opened the drawer of my desk and pulled out an old journal I kept in the early days, pages filled with frustration, rage, heartbreak. I flipped to a folded letter I had written to myself when I was sleeping in that car. They don't believe in you. But that doesn't matter. You do.
Keep going.
Make the world listen. And I had. By the end of that week, I received a call from an unknown number. My gut told me to ignore it. But something in me said otherwise. I answered. It was my mother. "Hi, sweetheart," she said softly. My heart clenched. That word, sweetheart, felt unfamiliar coming from her. She hadn't used that term since I was 10. "I just wanted to say we're sorry," she continued. "I was scared back then. We both were. Your father didn't know how to support you, and I didn't have the strength to go against him. But I watched every step you took, every interview, every milestone. We were wrong, and we know it." The sincerity in her voice sounded real, but my mind didn't trust easily. "You could have said this years ago," I whispered. "Why now?" She hesitated. "Because now we need you. And that makes it look like this is all about money. I know how it sounds, but I swear, this apology is real." Real or not, the damage had already been done. I told her I'd think about it and hung up. That night, I couldn't sleep. Not because of guilt, but because of the weight of power. For the first time in my life, I was in control of the narrative. I wasn't begging for scraps or validation. I was the one being asked for help. But it didn't feel like revenge. It felt like an opportunity, not to punish them, but to reclaim my peace. I went to my childhood neighborhood the next day. I parked in front of the old house, peeling paint, overgrown lawn, the same wind chimes that used to keep me awake in my tiny bedroom. And then I saw it, a foreclosure notice taped to the door. It was real. They were truly losing everything. That image hit me harder than any insult they'd ever thrown. I got back into my luxury car and just sat there. Tears welled in my eyes, not for them, but for the younger version of me who had once stood on that same lawn, being told he'd never amount to anything. Now they needed the failure to save them. The irony was poetic. and cruel. That evening, I opened my laptop and typed up an email. Subject: help. Hi, Mom and Dad. I've thought a lot about our conversations. I don't know if I'll ever forget the way you turned your back on me when I needed you the most. That pain shaped me, for better or worse. But I'm not here to play God. Attached is a financial proposal. It will help you keep the house and pay off the worst of your debts. No strings, no repayments. I'm not doing this because I owe you anything. I'm doing it because I owe it to myself not to carry this bitterness anymore. That's all. Your son. I hit send. And as I leaned back in my chair, I realized something. Success wasn't about the money. It wasn't about the fancy cars, the apartments, or even the public recognition. Success was having the power to do what they never did, offer help when it wasn't deserved. And in that moment, I finally felt free. I never imagined the day would come when I'd be the one they needed. It was a Sunday afternoon when I received their message. A simple text: "Can we talk?" 3 words. After years of silence, condescension, and absence, they wanted to talk. My hands trembled, not out of fear, but from the weight of 100 memories crashing into me at once. I invited them to my penthouse, not to show off, not even to gloat, but because I wanted them to see this life, this success, this skyline view. It all came without them. When they arrived, my father's eyes darted around the marble entryway like he was trying to make sense of how I'd done it. My mother's expression shifted between tight-lipped pride and restrained shame. They sat awkwardly across from me, on a velvet couch that probably cost more than the old car they gave me when I turned 16, then took back 2 months later after I refused to drop out of art school. "So," I said, pouring a glass of water I didn't offer them. "What do you want to talk about?" They hesitated. My father spoke first. We've been going through a bit of a rough patch." That's what they called it, a rough patch, as if my childhood wasn't one long patch of emotional drought. As if cutting me off wasn't a storm they set loose intentionally. My mother tried to sound casual. "Your dad's business didn't survive the economy, and, well, we're looking at losing the house." I raised an eyebrow. "You mean the house you said I didn't deserve to step foot in?" They flinched. My father sighed. "Look, we said things. Maybe too much. But we're still your parents." A part of me wanted to laugh, but it came out more like a scoff. I leaned forward, elbows on my knees. "Do you remember what you said the day I left?" I asked, staring into my father's eyes. "You told me, no money, no support, no safety net. You're on your own. Let's see how far that big dream of yours takes you." He said nothing. I turned to my mother. "You told me I was selfish for wanting something different, that I'd end up crawling back, begging for help." Her lip trembled, but she said nothing either. I continued, my voice steady. "I lived in a 1-bedroom with roaches for 2 years. Ate instant noodles 3 times a day. Slept next to a space heater that barely worked. I sold art on the street. I cold-called clients. I built this from scratch. You watched me struggle and said nothing. And now that I've made it, now you remember I exist?" My father finally snapped. "We didn't think you'd actually do it." Silence followed. I blinked. "You mean you wanted me to fail?" He rubbed his face in frustration. "We thought if you hit bottom, you'd come to your senses and come back. Get a real job. Live a normal life. You were too stubborn to listen." My mother chimed in, her voice shaky. "We thought we were protecting you from disappointment." I felt something twist inside me. Not quite anger. Not quite sorrow. A strange hybrid of both. "You weren't protecting me," I said coldly. "You were projecting your own fear onto me. And when I didn't break, you punished me for it." They both looked down.
Guilty.
Small. Like children who had been caught stealing. "I'm not heartless," I said after a long pause. "But I'm not the same kid you walked away from. I don't owe you anything." My father clenched his fists. "So, what? Are you just going to leave us to lose everything?" The question hung in the air, and then came the twist. "No," I said calmly. "I already bought your house. 3 months ago." Their heads snapped up. My mother whispered. You what? I saw the foreclosure notice. I had a friend at the bank tip me off. I paid the mortgage quietly through a shell company. You never lost it. I made sure of it. They looked stunned, eyes wide, lips parted in disbelief. Then why, my father started. Why did I let you come here and tell me your sob story? I finished for him, because I wanted to see if you'd admit what you did. And you didn't. They looked broken. My mother had tears in her eyes now. I didn't do it for you, I added. I did it for the version of me that still wanted your love. That kid deserved closure. I stood up. The conversation was over. The judgment had been passed. As I walked them to the door, I offered a final truth. Here's the thing, I said, voice low. I forgive you, but I don't trust you, and I don't need you. They stepped into the elevator, silent. As the doors began to close, my mother whispered, We're sorry. I nodded. Just once. And then the doors shut. The past couldn't be erased, but it had finally been confronted. And for the first time in years, I felt light.
Free.
The fallout wasn't just emotional, it was psychological, spiritual, and soul-wrenching. I had walked out of their house that day after the confrontation, their desperate eyes burning into the back of my head, their words ringing hollow in my ears. We didn't know you'd go this far. But I did go that far. And farther. They had said no money, no support, as if those words were a death sentence. They thought I'd crumple, fold into myself, beg for scraps. They underestimated what desperation breeds inside someone with fire in their soul. In the months that followed our explosive showdown, I kept my distance. There were days I hovered over the block button, days I reread old messages where they told me I was being unrealistic. When they said I should be grateful they let me stay under their roof until 18. When they said that if I couldn't conform, I'd be on my own. Now, I was on my own and thriving. I had just crossed my third million. My startup had gone global. An investor in Berlin wanted to acquire part of it. I wasn't just doing well. I was becoming a name. And yet, despite everything I had achieved, the emotional scarring from their abandonment still bled through in quiet moments. It was in the way I hesitated to trust others. In how I double-checked the locks every night, even in a luxury penthouse. In how I still felt like I had to prove myself, even though the world now applauded me. One rainy Thursday, my assistant buzzed me on the intercom. There's someone here. Says, she's your mother. I froze. I hadn't spoken to her in almost a year. Not since she tried to explain that they didn't mean it the way it sounded. Send her up. When the elevator doors opened, I barely recognized her. She looked older.
Worn.
The woman who once laughed at my dreams was now staring at the polished marble floors of my office with shame etched deep into her face. It's beautiful up here, she said quietly, clutching her worn-out handbag like a shield. You really did it. I didn't respond. I watched her look around, her eyes catching on the photos of me at tech events, shaking hands with CEOs, delivering keynote speeches in front of packed auditoriums. She looked like she'd walked into a stranger's life. We made mistakes, she finally whispered. Your father and we thought we were doing what was best. We thought you'd grow out of the phase. That you needed a push to find something stable. I stood silently behind my desk, arms crossed. She wasn't here just to apologize. She wanted something. They always did.
He's sick, she said at last.
Her voice cracked. We don't have the money for the treatments. The insurance lapsed and we didn't know where else to turn. And there it was. The catch. The reason for the tears. You turned away when I needed you, I said flatly. When I asked for just enough to get by, you slammed the door. Now you want me to open mine.
She didn't deny it.
Her silence was louder than any excuse. I wanted to scream, to throw every memory at her like daggers. The birthdays they ignored, the letters they returned, the voicemail where my father told me, don't come crying to us when you fail. But I didn't. Because I had changed. I had evolved. And the version of me standing in that office didn't need revenge anymore. I needed clarity. I'll help, I said quietly. But not because you deserve it. Because I do. She looked up, eyes brimming. I will pay for his treatment, I continued. But we're not going to pretend we're family again. That bond broke a long time ago, and I'm not here to rebuild it out of pity. Her shoulders collapsed under the weight of my words. She nodded slowly, as if the last bit of illusion she'd held shattered in that moment. And then, just as she turned to leave, she stopped. "You're not the same kid we left behind, are you?" she asked, almost to herself. "No," I replied, my voice firm. "He died the day you locked that door." She walked out, and I felt a strange stillness settle over the room.
Not peace.
Not closure. Just quiet acceptance. Weeks passed. I transferred the funds through my legal team with strict conditions. No direct contact, no emotional appeals, no manipulation. But the past has a strange way of returning when you least expect it. One night, after a company gala in LA, I came home and found an envelope at my door. No stamp, no address, just my name, handwritten. I opened it slowly. Inside, a folded letter and a photo. The letter was from my younger cousin Mia. She was 15 now, living with my parents. She wrote about how they told her stories of me, how they showed her newspaper clippings and online interviews, how they said they always knew I'd be someone big. But the photo that shattered me. It was of my old bedroom. The same posters still on the wall. A small shrine in the corner with candles. My photo, framed. Below it, scribbled in shaky handwriting. "We failed you, but we never stopped watching." My knees buckled. That final twist, the idea that despite their harshness, their cruelty, their rejection, they were always watching me rise from the ashes. It didn't excuse anything, but it explained everything. And just as I turned out the light, I caught a glimpse of something in the hallway mirror. A shape. Fleeting. Watching. I spun around. Nothing. But my heart pounded. Because somewhere deep down, I knew the story wasn't over. Not yet. I remember the first time I saw my name printed on the side of a product in a retail store. It was surreal, like something out of a dream I dared to keep alive when no one else believed in it. The product was simple, a line of eco-friendly skincare items I had developed for my kitchen, scraping together leftover savings, odd jobs, and discarded packaging. Now it sat under spotlights, arranged neatly, proudly mine. I stood there, in the middle of the store aisle, surrounded by customers who had no idea about the storm I had walked through to get here. But in my mind, I wasn't thinking of them. I was thinking about my parents, the same parents who, not too long ago, told me, "We're not going to support your fantasy. If you want to chase dreams, you're on your own." I had been. Completely. No backup plan. No fall safe. Just me, a cluttered one-bedroom apartment, and a furious determination to never need their help again. The first few years had been brutal, cold nights, overdue rent notices, debt collectors. But even through the hunger and exhaustion, I refused to fold. I taught myself how to formulate, how to brand, how to market. I worked double shifts, skipped meals, and sent out hundreds of samples to influencers who never replied. But I didn't stop.
And now?
Now they were the ones calling me. The first time my mother messaged me was on LinkedIn of all places.
Short.
Hesitant. "Saw your feature in Forbes. We're proud. Hope we can talk soon." I didn't reply. Not out of cruelty, but because I wasn't ready. I needed time to understand what I was feeling. Was it validation? Bitterness? Closure? Maybe all three. But the calls kept coming. My father called next. Left a voicemail. "I know we didn't always see eye to eye, but you've made something incredible. We'd like to come visit if you're okay with that." Visit? The same parents who once said I was throwing away my future? The same father who said I was too soft to be successful? I stared at the screen, and instead of responding, I went back to work. Because that's what had changed. I wasn't doing any of this for their approval anymore. I had become someone who didn't need it. Eventually, curiosity got the best of me, and I agreed to meet them, on my terms. We met at the headquarters of my company, a sleek, two-story glass building nestled in an upscale district they had never visited. I walked into the conference room wearing a tailored suit and a calm expression. My assistant brought them coffee. They looked out of place, nervous, humbled. My mother tried to smile. My father didn't know where to put his hands. "This place is amazing," my mom said. "We had no idea." I nodded. "That's because you never asked." My father cleared his throat. "You proved us wrong. I admit it. We thought you'd crash and burn." "You made sure I would," I replied calmly. "And that's exactly why I didn't." There was a pause, thick, uncomfortable, but necessary. Then my father said, almost in disbelief, "How did you do all this?" I shrugged. "I took everything you told me I couldn't do, and I did it anyway." Silence again. Then my mom reached into her bag and pulled out an envelope. "It's an invitation. Your cousin's getting married. The whole family would love to see you again. It would mean a lot." I looked at the envelope. I didn't open it. I simply placed it back on the table. "I'll think about it," I said. "But I want you both to understand something. I didn't become who I am because of you. I became who I am in spite of you." They nodded, quietly, humbly. And for once, they didn't argue. After they left, I sat back in my chair, staring out the window of my corner office. The city stretched before me, bright and unbothered, just like I felt inside. I wasn't the same person they turned away years ago. I was stronger,
Sharper. Whole.
I didn't need their apologies, their invitations, or even their recognition, because I had already received the only validation that mattered. Success. Built from scratch. Owned completely. And as I leaned back, fingers steepled, a quiet smile played across my lips. They said, "No money, no support, but I made my own way." And now, they're the ones waiting to hear back from me. The first message came on a Monday morning, just a bland, "Hey, how have you been?" from a number I hadn't saved. I didn't need to. I recognized the rhythm of their silence before. Now I knew the rhythm of their regret. It was my mother. I stared at the screen for a while, unreadable emotions pooling in my chest. This was the same woman who once stood at the doorway while I packed my things, saying, "If you leave like this, don't come back asking for help." The same woman who told me money doesn't fall from the sky and dreams don't pay rent. I had memorized her warnings like scripture. Cold, sharp, and final. I didn't reply. By Friday, my father had sent me a long voice note. His voice cracked in places I didn't remember it ever cracking. He mentioned hearing about my success from some cousin or someone, pretending as if he hadn't been watching from the digital shadows for years. He talked about being proud but unsure how to reach out. He said they'd always believed I was capable. The hypocrisy made my throat tighten. Where were those beliefs when I was sleeping in my car, skipping meals to keep my LLC alive? Where was their faith when I was pawning old electronics just to pay for software subscriptions? They believed in me now because they had no choice. That same week, an old friend messaged me too. Or more accurately, the friend who faded away when I started to struggle. She congratulated me, sent a heart emoji, asked if I remembered the days we used to plan our futures on the back of diner napkins. I did. And I remembered how she ghosted me after I missed one rent payment. Everyone was knocking now.
Emails flooded in.
DMs. Contacts I hadn't spoken to in years suddenly found reasons to reach out. Some were subtle. "Let's grab coffee sometime." Others were blunt. "Hey, any chance you're looking for a business partner or investor?" One even wrote, "Heard you made it big, can I pitch you a startup idea?" I started keeping a folder titled, "Too Late." I didn't answer any of them. It wasn't about revenge. Not entirely. It was about silence, the same silence they had offered me when I needed just a little bit of belief. A little warmth. A small gesture of love or loyalty. I survived without their voices, so I didn't need them echoing now that I was standing tall. Then came the letter. A real one. Handwritten. It was from my mother. I don't know if she thought the ink would carry more weight, more sincerity, but the words hit harder than I expected. She wrote that things hadn't been easy, that they didn't know how to raise a dreamer like me, that they feared for me and thought tough love was the only way I'd survive. She said she regretted how harsh they were, how they'd measured my worth by tradition, stability, and bank balances, never realizing I was building a fortune from scratch. She even apologized. 3 times. That broke something open in me. Not anger, not sadness. Just the sobering awareness that sometimes people only apologize when your success makes their guilt impossible to deny. I didn't respond. Not yet. Instead, I drove to the old neighborhood. I parked outside the house where I grew up and just stared. The windows looked smaller. The fence was rusting. The porch light still flickered. For a moment, I imagined getting out of the car, knocking on the door, and having that dramatic reunion you see in movies, tears, hugs, forgiveness. But then I remembered the cold winters with no support. The Christmases I spent alone. The birthdays I worked through because there was no one to celebrate with. I turned the engine back on. They could wait.
Just like I had.
Later that month, I was invited to speak at a conference. Keynote slot, spotlight, standing ovation. I told the audience the truth. That I had no safety net. No family money. No cheerleaders. Just the fire that comes from being told you'll fail. After the talk, a young man approached me. Barely 20, eyes burning with that same wild ambition I used to carry like a curse. He said, "My parents don't believe in me either. But you showed me it's possible." I gave him my business card and told him something no one ever told me. You don't need their approval. Just your own resilience. That night, I finally responded to my parents. Not with anger. Not with guilt. Just a sentence they'd have to sit with. Now you know what it feels like to be ignored. I put my phone away and returned to my new life. A life I built brick by brick, with no blueprint, no applause, and no help. And for the first time, I felt completely at peace with the silence. I didn't realize how much the world would shift once the money came in. Not just financially, but socially, emotionally, psychologically. Suddenly, the same people who once rolled their eyes when I said I had a plan were now calling me a visionary. Old friends who had disappeared without warning started appearing like ghosts, with overly enthusiastic greetings and awkward laughs. But nothing was more bizarre than how my parents began to transform in front of my eyes. The same parents who once shouted, "You think you're special? You'll end up with nothing," were now proudly telling neighbors I was their child. As if the scathing silence and slammed doors never happened. As if they had believed in me all along. I had just purchased my second property, a waterfront condo in Miami, when my mom posted a photo of it online, captioning it, "So proud of our brilliant son and everything he's achieved." My chest tightened when I saw it, not with pride, but with disbelief. This was the same woman who once told me I was a leech, that I was wasting my life with my delusions. The same woman who refused to lend me $50 for groceries when I was sleeping on a friend's couch and skipping meals.
But now,
I was a self-made miracle. Now, I was the trophy she paraded around to her church group and extended relatives. It wasn't just her. My father, who used to mock my ideas and say, "Nobody is going to buy anything from a nobody like you," now talked to me with forced respect. He'd still clear his throat before asking me anything, as if choking on the pride he once held so tightly. And it wasn't subtle anymore. One night he called me. That alone was unusual enough. I couldn't remember the last time he had initiated contact without my mother prompting him. But this time, his voice was quiet. Careful. "Hey, son. Got a minute?" There was no shouting. No sarcasm. Just those few words, heavy with something I couldn't place. He talked about how the workshop he had worked at for 25 years was cutting hours. That retirement was coming faster than expected. That savings weren't what he hoped. That, without directly saying it, he was scared. I listened, letting the silence between us stretch like a tightrope. It would have been easy to say, "You made your bed, lie in it." It would have been fair to say, "You didn't believe in me. Why should I help you now?" But what I said was softer than I expected. "I'm sorry to hear that, Dad." He paused. Then, we made mistakes. I see that now. I just want you to know I'm proud of you. Truly.
pride,
The word landed like a punch in the ribs.
late,
Painful. but somehow still necessary. A part of me wanted to believe it, that maybe they had changed, that maybe the success had humbled them. But another part of me remembered everything. Every ignored call, every slammed door, every look of disgust when I asked for a little help. That duality began following me everywhere. Outwardly, I was the success story, the millionaire with glowing headlines and glossy podcasts. But inside, I was constantly juggling two truths. One, that I had made it. Two, that the people who raised me only cared now that I had something they wanted. The world looked at me differently now, elevated me. I was invited to panels, given awards, and asked for advice by people who once barely made eye contact. At networking events, people leaned in with fascination. They'd heard the story, the underdog who turned rejection into riches. But they didn't know the whole story. They didn't see me standing outside my childhood home, too ashamed to knock, wondering if my parents would turn me away again. They didn't hear my mother saying, "Maybe if you got a real job, we'd be more supportive." They didn't know how it felt to eat a vending machine dinner while my friends celebrated promotions at their family-funded startups. Now they just saw the millions, the polished suit, the confidence, the curated life. They didn't know I still sometimes woke up in a cold sweat from dreams where I was broke again, begging my parents for help and hearing them laugh. Even with all the success, I wasn't sure if those wounds would ever fully heal. One afternoon, as I looked out at the ocean from my balcony, I received a text from my mother. "We were thinking of coming down to visit. Is that okay? We'd love to see your place." For a moment, I didn't reply. I stared at it, unsure what to feel. It wasn't about whether I had space. It was about whether I had room. In my heart, in my boundaries, in my peace. I took a deep breath, the wind rustling through the palm trees below. Then I typed slowly, "Let me think about it." Send. Because for the first time in my life, I was the one with the power to decide. I'll never forget the look on my mother's face when she stepped into my penthouse for the first time. Her eyes darted from the marble floors to the glass chandelier and then to the floor-to-ceiling windows that framed the New York skyline. For a second, I thought she might cry, not from pride, but from confusion, maybe even disbelief. My father, rigid and uncomfortable, stood next to her like he had walked into a courtroom, not his son's home. They hadn't said much when I invited them. Just a short reply, "We'll see if we can make it." The same vague dismissal I used to get when I asked them to come to school events as a child. But now, standing inside the empire they never believed in, their silence said more than any apology ever could. I poured them drinks, something simple. I could have brought out the vintage champagne or opened a bottle that cost more than their monthly rent. But I chose water. Cold. Filtered. Impersonal. Just like the years they spent pretending I didn't exist unless I was failing. My father cleared his throat. "You've done well." Done well? That's what you say when your kid gets a C in math. Not when they've built a multi-million-dollar tech brand from scratch. Not when the world calls them a genius. But I nodded. "Thanks. I had to." My mother's voice was softer. It must have been hard. That was the closest she'd ever come to acknowledging the pain they caused. I turned toward her slowly. "Yeah, it was." She looked down. The air in the room felt heavier. For the first time in years, I wasn't the one seeking their approval. They were seeking mine and failing to know how. They didn't say it, but I could feel it. Regret. Maybe even guilt. But guilt doesn't pay back the years of loneliness, the nights I spent scraping pennies, or the humiliations I endured just to survive. And yet, I didn't feel anger anymore. Just clarity. I showed them around, kept my voice neutral. I didn't gloat. I didn't throw their past words in their faces. I let the silence do the work. Let the polished marble, the awards on the shelf, and the quiet humming of wealth speak louder than any argument. As we sat down for dinner, yes, catered, I saw something shift in their eyes. It wasn't pride. It was powerlessness. They realized they had lost control a long time ago. And I realized I didn't need their validation anymore. That was the moment I truly became free.